Good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome to this, the third of the 2025 Dante Public Lecture Series. We've had Steve Milner talk to us about industrial Dante. 2 weeks ago, we had Zig Baranski give a tour de force on rethinking certain structures related to the Commedia. Next week, we are going to venture into the world of contemporary poetry and translation and tradaptation, if you like, with the wonderful Kimberly Campanello, and then our own George Rayson, will be finishing us off in the fifth week, looking at the really interesting topic of the hatbacks and other things besides mix, and as a final lecture. But today, very much in the midway of our journey, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Gaia Tomazzoli from La Sapienza in Rome. Gaia is a researcher and lecturer at La Sapienza, where she also did her undergraduate and master's degrees. It was also during this time that she spent a year at King's College, Cambridge, and under the supervision of Saverio Bellomo and Eugenio Burgio, she completed a doctorate at the University of Ca' Foscari in Venice back in 2018. It was also during this period that she did some research at the Sorbonne in Paris, and she's also been a member of various research projects, including the Hypermedia Dante Network at the University of Pisa, where she worked for a while, before finally returning to La Sapienza, where she currently works. Her doctoral thesis won first prize as a PhD thesis on Dante and was published in 2023 with the title Metafore e linguaggio figurato nel Medioevo e nell'opera di Dante. And it really is a wonderful book, and I recommend it to everybody here. It offers a very innovative analysis of Dante's figurative language in relation both to the theoretical framework developed in his works and discursive strategies realized in his poetry. And in doing so, it also provides an overview of medieval theories of figurative languages. So it's a really, really, really important topic. But she's going to be talking to us this evening about something completely different. I've heard Gaia at various conferences, and she is quite brilliant, talking about various things, but she's going to talk to us about digital projects that are digital humanities projects in particular that are related to Dante and the kind of presence of Dante in a completely different sphere. And the title of her lecture this evening is Dante Goes Viral, Digital Projects from Language to Interpretation. So please join me in welcoming Gaia. Share screen. Share, sorry.
No worries.
Okay.
Thank you, Darak, for this very generous presentation and for having me here. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today, to be receiving such a warm welcome from you all. So as Darak said, today I will be presenting some of the most important digital projects in the field of Dante studies. Obviously, I will not be able, and I apologize from the very beginning, to cover all the projects and to give to each and every one of them the space that they would deserve in this discussion. But what I will try to do is to highlight some of the main trends, what are the things that are changing, what is the direction we are taking, and where there is room for improvement. So what are we doing? Well, the digital humanities, since it's a very recent field, it's also a very self-reflexive one. And so from the very beginning, scholars in this discipline have been wondering about what it is that digital humanities are bringing to the fore. There have been questions about the fact whether it is just old wine in new bottles, as it has been put, or if it is truly as revolutionary as it sometimes seems, and as we most of the time claim, especially when we ask for fundings. What is for sure is that there is something that has been called the fast revolution. We cannot deny that thanks to the digital environment, texts and all other contents are now available on the web in a very fast and easy way. We can retrieve information with unprecedented velocity. This means that access to knowledge is way more democratic, which does not entirely cancel injustice of several forms. Linguistic injustice, for one, but also digital literacy injustice and injustice in access to the web. One of the main fields that has been more revolutionized by the web in the case of Dante studies is obviously teaching. Thanks to the web, that is very straightforward, but we have now access to a lot of content that we can develop and use in our teaching. And as I will try to show today, there has been at the very beginning an attempt to reproduce on the web page the structure of medieval paratext. So we have charts, dictionaries, maps, all the contents that were, since the very beginning of the Middle Ages, besides the text to facilitate its reading. We are now moving forward in the most advanced projects to an hypermedia approach, where media are put together in ways that could not be possible with the analogic dimension. And we are seeing an attempt to provide more multi-layered readings, especially allowing a good customization of the resources we access online and captivating an immersive experience, which is obviously very useful when it comes to enticing students in our teaching. The Dante we read today on the web is more than ever possibly a worldwide Dante. So projects are conceived for multilingual and multicultural readership. As I said, there is still a lot of digital injustice. The room that has been given to Dante in the Anglophone and Italian world is almost all the room that has been given to digital projects. We have very few projects in other languages. But these projects are centered on a broader notion of reception and scholarship. So they tend to go over the boundaries of traditional scholarship. From a more specific and technical point of view, the most remarkable innovations are probably those in digital philology. And that is because through the web and the digital environment in general, we can now have semi or completely automatic transcriptions of manuscripts and print editions, collation of variants. We can also adopt phylogenetic methodologies, which are methodologies borrowed from the human life sciences to compare the manuscripts and weight the different variants in their tradition. All of this leads to hybrid scholarly editions, meaning editions where we do not only have the critical text, as in traditional critical editions, but we can also access the transcriptions. We can also access and therefore verify the transcriptions and the critical text, the images. And these images tend to be more and more complete. They involve not only the text, but all the feature of the manuscript tradition, including illustrations, commentaries, and marginal notes. As it has been recently suggested by Vittorio Celotto and Andrea Mazzucchi, there are a few important features shared by medieval manuscripts and the online digital text, the digital text, such as the fact that they are not stable. We can edit a web page and nobody would possibly know. But they are also very open towards multimediality. That is really true for medieval texts. You probably all have in mind medieval manuscripts with charts and illustrations and the like. And something else that they share is a very problematic authorship. Finally, another field that has been subject to a lot of innovation is the one of digital lexicography and computational linguistics. And here, perhaps, we have not yet seen the advancements that we could see thanks to new projects in natural language processing and the large language models. But we still have an unprecedented coverage of text, so we can access online and we can search for words and structures on a very vast, on a huge series of corpora. And we also have tools such as the one allowing an automatic part-of-speech tagging and syntactic annotation. I will discuss some of those later on in the talk. So to provide just a very brief outline of what I will cover today, what do we do when we present a digital project on the web, a digital project about Dante on the web? Well, first of all, we are editors, so we provide access to Dante's text. There has been a lot of criticism towards what it has been called fast food readers. So we can access text on the web very easily and quickly, but most of the times, especially at the beginning, these texts were not carefully proofread. So they contained a lot of errors, both because they came from OCR, which were not very refined when Google Books started to digitize a lot of books, but also sometimes they would put online by someone who didn't check everything as carefully as they should. So I will present today some projects which in turn are very authoritative in the text that they provide. And also, as I said before, digital philology has meant that we can go from traditional critical text to much more complex critical editions that couldn't be accessible, that couldn't be possible in paper form. As I said, we're also teachers, so we exploit these digital projects to create tools that are aimed at all readers, such as bibliography, commentaries, multimedia projects, and projects concerning sources and reception of Dante. We are also linguists. So as I said earlier, we study Dante's language, which is obviously crucial in understanding Italian language as a whole, and lexicography, morphology, and syntax are now covered from very important projects. And finally, as scholars, we aggregate, filter, and analyze unprecedented quantities of data. So we can now range through a huge variety of content, but we still need to filter all of this content. And so what is perhaps most challenging today is going from this huge quantity of data, so from a quantitative perspective to a qualitative perspective. And this is the last project I will present. It's a project I'm currently involved on. It's a project that is trying to move towards traditional metadata projects, which are centered on material features of the text, date of composition, and all that pertains to the physical objects of our cultural heritage, to move to interpretation. So what we do with text when we read them and we propose hypotheses about their meaning. The main things that we will cover in this discussion are different technologies. I will not linger on the technicalities, but the first projects that were developed were projects in HTML, and in the last few decades, a new very important portable language, which is XML, has been more and more widespread. But today we also have more interoperable languages and protocols, such as IIIF and RDF, that I will explain later. These languages and models are obviously more powerful in that they allow us to connect a lot of data and to perform very complex queries, but it is also much more time consuming to produce data in these formats. Not everybody can digitize a manuscript through a protocol to be compliant with IIIF, and so it's more difficult to provide those. There has been, in my opinion, a shift in platforms. So in the way we access all these projects, the very first projects that were launched online were very branded. Think of the Dante project that we have all used so much and is still so fundamental today. I think we're now moving towards platforms that are more, that involve a lot of institutions, that are integrated, but at the same time, there is still a lot of rivalry, and that is not making things easier. Finally, we have been switching from a more traditional knowledge representation approach, which was mainly based on relational databases. You've all seen an Excel file. Relational databases are conceived in the same way. They might be a bit more complex, have more columns, but the gist of it is the same. We now tend to represent knowledge through graphs, meaning, yes, something where we have nodes and connections and that we can virtually expand as much as we want. This is obviously more powerful to query because we can find information from all parts of the graph, but it's also more difficult to provide standardized queries Most of these knowledge graphs are accessible to Sparkle endpoints, but you need to know the Sparkle language to query those endpoints, which is not for everybody. So this is an outline of what I will be discussing today. I will now present a few projects. I will not linger on them, as I said, as much as I should, but I will try to give you some interesting idea about all of them. So first of all is Dante Online. That is a very crucial platform launched very early and managed by the Società Dantesca Italiana. It has other content which are not entirely updated, but it is useful and it is worth quoting, especially with your students, because it provides very reliable critical editions of all the text written by Dante in the Italian translation, in the case of Latin text, and in English translation as well. So the texts that you find here are very correct according to the critical edition. And it's also been updated. So for example, you can see that the Commedia is featured not only in the Petrocchi edition, but also in the more recent edition provided by Giorgio Inglese. Another very recent project is Dante Critical Text, which has been very recently launched online, and it's part of the recent Naples Dante project. This is one of the projects I was mentioning before. It's a federation of different projects covering several sub-projects and institutions working on them. This particular project, Dante Critical Text, allows users to compare different critical texts in Dante's Commedia. You can see that the differences from the two texts are highlighted in red, and it complements Dante Online in that it publishes critical editions that are not featured on Dante Online, such as the ones by Malato and Trovato Tonello, which are so far both limited to the Inferno, in the making for the other two Cantiche. Another crucial project from the philological point of view is Dante Commedia. This is a project which was originally published in DVD, so you can really see how much time are changing. And Pruscio had been working with Peter Robinson for decades on a critical edition of the Monarchia, which was also accessible on DVD. And the Monarchia is not yet available online, but the Commedia is, thanks to the Fondazione Franceschini. If you go on the website of the Dante Commedia, you can access high-resolution, full-color digital images of 7 key manuscripts in Dante's poem. It's the manuscripts that are on the base for the edition provided by Sanguinetti in 2011. So you can compare the manuscripts with the two print editions by Petrocchi and Sanguinetti with a very wide series of possibilities. So for example, you can browse the manuscript, and some of them are really beautiful, so it's just a pleasure to look at them. And you can also have a word-by-word collation of the text, showing all variants. So you can see here that every word is featured with all the readings in the different manuscripts. And we can compare those with critical editions, either Petrocchi or Sanguinetti. But you can also use this V-based software, which was implemented by Peter Robinson in their collaboration. V-base allows for complex queries where variants are distributed. So you can see on the left that you have all the different readings in each manuscript. In green are the readings that differ from the critical edition that has been used as the main text. But you can also see the variant map, which is the tree you see there, where agreements or disagreements between the different manuscripts are highlighted. And if you navigate the text and you, with your mouse, linger on every word, you can also access, on top you see the critical edition, and in the bottom part of the pop-up window, you see the different witnesses provided by the manuscript. So it's a very complex tool, very thorough. So the transcriptions are very well made, and people can also obviously verify them on the manuscript. Another project which has a similar goal has been launched very recently. I was in November in Florence at the conference which was meant to inaugurate this project. It's called Limina, and it is directed by Ciro Perna and Elisabetta Tonello. The idea of this project is to give space to the limina, so the verbal and graphical traces that are left on the margins of, they have selected 90 manuscripts from 1321 to 1355. It's almost empty because it's a very recent project, so you will not find much so far, but hopefully you will in time. So you can query the manuscripts through textual queries, but also you can filter the data according to manuscripts, to who is the person responsible for the annotation, the different types of annotation, so if they're either graphical or verbal, etc., etc. And it also features Limina different sub-projects that have been announced but are not online yet. The only one which is online is Dante Matrix. Yes, yeah, that's brilliant. With Dante Matrix, users can explore the genealogical similarities among all manuscripts of the Commedia, so far limited to the Inferno. It has been somewhat easy for them to put all of this amazing content online because it's a project managed by someone who was part of the Gruppo di Ferrara. As you probably know, the Gruppo di Ferrara is committed to a new critical edition of the Commedia under the supervision of Paolo Trovato, revising the different methodologies adopted in the past. So they are collating all manuscripts from all the tradition. And so through Dante Matrix, you can filter the philological traits that you want to see, and you can produce tables which will tell you how many are the similarities between manuscripts and what is the percentage of distance between a text and another one. And you can select as many manuscripts as you want, and you can also produce a sub-archetype, so a potential virtual archetype that would put together the manuscripts you have selected. There are 3 other sub-projects to Limina, which are only announced. They are not, they are online, but they're empty so far. One is Diverse. It's a database on vernacular translations and commentaries from 19th century onwards. You have Dante, which is a digital archive of illustrations from print editions to today, which is also meant to provide a 3D experience. I know that they have been presenting this in January at a conference in Naples. And then we will have Dante Giuyo, I hope I'm pronouncing the Japanese word well, which is a project focused on Dante's reception in Japan. So with editions, cultural reception in a broad sense. But we don't know much about these projects because they're not online yet. Another project realized by sort of the same group is the group of the Università Federico II in Napoli in 2021, is the Illuminated Dante project. It was launched in 2021, and it is now part of the Naples Dante project. As I mentioned earlier, it's a wider confederation of different projects. The Illuminated Dante project provides a complete and systematic survey of illuminated manuscripts in Dante's Commedia. It is not complete yet, but you can see quite a few manuscripts. So you can either read the text online, as you can see here in the critical edition by Petrocchi, and for each verse, if you click on the verse, you will see on the right side of the screen all the manuscript illustrations that do represent that verse. What is interesting from a scholarly point of view in the Illuminated Dante project is that they developed a manuscript description protocol inspired by Manus Online. So Manus Online is the project managed by the Istituto del Catalogo Unico Italiano, which has a series of guidelines for how manuscripts should be described to be compliant with a unique framework. But it also adopts, as I mentioned before, IIIF. So IIIF is the International Image Interoperability Framework. It is a protocol which was born as to avoid the problem of having to download and host on different servers, university servers or other institution servers, huge quantities of very heavy images and other stuff. So with IIIF, each library can digitize a manuscript, and when a project wants to connect to that image, they don't have to go and take the image. They can just have a protocol of data exchange to put it in a very simple way. Which means that if the library tomorrow digitizes the manuscripts from afresh with a more powerful scanner, the image will be updated. And with AAAF, you can also manipulate the image. So you can select the parts of it to, for example, account for the fact that you want to focus only on a part of the page, the manuscript. So in the Illuminated Dante project, as I said, you can either browse the text or you can perform queries. For example, you can search for different subjects of the illustrations. You can see a few examples here, but you can also search for the people involved in the manuscript. So either the person who possessed the manuscript, or the author, or the commentator, or the illustrator, and so on. Or otherwise, you can search through the different types of illumination. So if there are the initial letters, the capital letters, or a miniature, and so on. I'm going quickly through a few more projects. Dante Polyglotta is a very interesting website launched in 2021 by a writer, Giuliano Torone. It is meant to catalog the translation of Dante's Commedia, and so far it collects more than 7 languages and a lot of dialects, with more than 300 editions. So for each edition, you have very few details. You just have the title, the date, the author, the translator, and a few pages. The one that I put here, obviously, is the one in Gaelic. So you don't get much content, but the list is quite complete and interesting. This is a fundamental tool that needs very little presentation, the Bibliografia Dantesca. It's made out of a collaboration between the Società Dantesca Italiana and the Dante Society of America. And when you are a Dante scholar and you move to study another author, you get entirely astonished by the fact that other scholars don't have such a powerful tool as this, and you have to manually prepare a bibliography. It's a bilingual database with daily updates. It's quite impressive how quickly things get to the Bibliografia Dantesca. You can combine multiple filters to search for the bibliography you need, and you can either visualize online the list of the contributions that respond to your query, or download them in either doc or PDF. This is very interesting project. It was founded by Roberto Lander in 1999, so very early, but at the same time not as early as the Dartmouth Dante project we will discuss. The idea was to create a multimedia tool including various resources. So you have the biography, Dante's biography by Toynbee. You also have lectures on specific topics, maps, charts, genealogical tables, illustrations, references. There is a huge gap between minor works. For those, you can only read the text in the original language and in the English translation, whereas for the Commedia, you have access to a lot of content. So the Commedia is published as an annotated text. You can see in the bottom right. So you have some philological notes, but they stopped at Canto 4 of the Inferno, so very few. Historical notes by Toynbee as well, links to the commentaries digitized by the previous project by Hollander, the Dartmouth Dante project, but you also have images, audio files with reading of the text in both Italian and English. As you can see, it's a bit old-fashioned. But it still provides a lot of content, and I think it can still be very, very useful, especially in teaching. As is the case for this other project, The Word of Dante, created by Deborah Parker at the University of Virginia in 1997. I don't know if you realize how early 1997 was to produce such projects. It was later expanded again in 2006. It is a hypermedia research tool aimed at all readers. So here again, you have Dante's text, but this time the text has been treated with XML tags. So you can visualize the people, places, creatures, deities, structures, images, and music that are associated to each word or segment of the text. The website also has a visual and musical archive, a lot of illustrations and audio recordings, very interesting interactive maps and diagrams, and a great timeline that can be very useful, and a selection of teaching resources. So you can either perform a simple or structured query, or just navigate the text and expand on the hyperlink. So this is the timeline that I mentioned. You can see here that you have Dante's birth, and then for every year you have different events, historical events, artistic events, etc. And if you click on each of them, you can expand a little pop-up with a little more detail. It's not super detailed, but it's still kind of complete. And otherwise, if you browse the text, you have the original text here, the translation. And here, for example, I was selecting the people. So you can see all the verses where different peoples are mentioned in the first canto. If you click on one of them, say Enea, you open a pop-up with more info pertaining to each and every character, place, etc. that is mentioned. Or you can perform a query. So for example, if I'm interested in the places mentioned in the Commedia, I can either select a specific place or choose among places that are either historical or mythological, etc., etc. So as you can see, it's kind of complete in a lot of information it gives on specific aspects of the text. A few projects on Dante's reception. This is something that I'm really happy to be mentioning, not only because Federica was here, but also because she's a dear friend, and it's a wonderful project that she has been developing. It's very recent as well. Modern Beatrice Archives is meant to document the lives of more than 200 women writers who were active in Italy, Britain, Ireland, and the US. So for each of these women, you have her bio and a lot of detailed information on, as a total of 367 works that have been published between 1770 and 1921. The website also features a digital exhibit. Federica has also organized a physical exhibit in Ravenna. But on the website, you can browse the digital one with narratives, displays, and images. And for the database per se, you can either search the archives, the biographical and the bibliographical archive through alphabetic lists, or through some filters pertaining, for example, in the case of women, the country they were born, language, their occupation, and in the case of their works, language, what type of resource it is, etc., etc. Each entry is described by the relevant metadata, and it is provided with media, and especially to link to its digital version. Most of these works, since they are older than a century, are freely accessible through Google Books or Archive. So you can use the website as the mediator to go and access this content. And Federica has also been working on incredible possibilities for data visualization. So you have network analysis, emphasizing the way these women were connected with each other, G-snapping, and a lot of interesting charts that are very detailedly commented and explained. Another project that has been very recently relaunched, I realized in preparing these slides that the website had an entirely new structure, is Dante Today. It is a digital archive created by Ariel Seiber and Elizabeth Coggeshall. What is interesting is not only that it features sightings of Dante in contemporary culture, but also that it is crowdsourced, meaning that everybody can take a picture and propose something to the website. And this is also why the collection now includes more than 2,800 references. All the items are divided into 10 categories: consumer goods, digital media, etc., etc. But you can also browse the content through maps. You can access teaching resources and a bibliography. So here, for example, is an image I really liked. But you can also see how widespread is the origin of all of these citing and sightings. And here are the different categories that you are meant to use to filter this huge quantity of contemporary reception of Dante's work. Another project that would not need presentation is Digital Dante. You probably know this. It was created in the early 90s by Teodolinda Barolini at Columbia, but it was entirely restyled in 2014, and it is now currently being expanded again. The goal of Digital Dante is to publish original and transmedial research on Dante, and especially research that is born digital, meaning that is produced to be featured on the website. The most important of these features is the Commento Baroliniano. It's an original commentary that Teodolinda Barolini has prepared for the website. So for each canto, you have the commentary, you have images, you have links, and you also have other sections with materials and scholarly contributions on a very wide range of subjects. So you have images, sound, history. It's huge, and I really cannot possibly have the time to comment on all of its features. But I will mention Intertextual Dante, which is a sub-project of Digital Dante. At present, it's a catalog of more than 150 points of contact between Dante and Ovid. The author, Julie Van Pittegem, has announced that she is working to expand the project to include Winizelli as well. As you can see here, you can see the two texts side by side. So here is the point of contact between Dante's text and the parallel passage in Ovid. And you have a small pop-up giving you some info on the point of contact. Otherwise, you can filter the parallel between the two texts. So for example, you can decide whether you're interested in linguistic points of context or geographical or those that are linked to characters and places. And the idea of Dante's sources is clearly fundamental. So another important project is Dante Medieval Archive, developed at the University of Pisa since 2016. It's an archive of text annotated in XML that can be downloaded. So it's a huge archive. Text visualization is honestly not great, and you cannot do much with those texts, but you can access a great deal of them. So you have the whole corpus of Dante's works. You have a lot of classical and medieval primary sources, including commentaries on Virgil and Horace that are not so easy to find otherwise online. You also have letter collections, a wide selection of pastoral works, Roman sources, philosophical and theological works by Augustine, Aquinas, etc. You can also perform full text queries. So if you're looking for a specific word, you can browse the whole library. And you can look through a selection of loci paralleli, or at least I thought you could. But this morning, when I tried it out to make sure that everything was working, I realized that in this very precise moment, you cannot. And that is another problem that I will be discussing at the end of the talk. I will move more to the more linguistic side, which is what I'm more interested in and what I'm working on. And I will be very briefly presenting two fundamental projects, which are the Vocabolario Dantesco and Vocabolario Dantesco Latino. They're obviously twin projects launched by the Accademia della Crusca and the OVI and the Università di Pisa, in the case of Vocabolario Dantesco Latino. They're open online dictionaries. They follow the great example of the Tesoro della Lingua Italiana delle Origini. The directors announced that they will also appear in print, which is like a curious choice. So they're based on a traditional lexicographical approach, but what makes them unique is that they have very strong connections to other corpora. So that is something I was saying before. Thanks to the web, you can access a wide range of text organized in corporas and other lexicographic resources such as dictionaries, historical dictionaries, and so on. So it really gives you a grasp not only of the meaning of Dante's words, but also of their context and on medieval language use in general. Obviously, users can peruse the vocabulary as a traditional dictionary, so through the word list, but they can also include or exclude graphical variants, or refine their queries to, for example, visualize only words with a specific origin. You can see here only words that are borrowed from Arabic, etc., or only words that have a very specific use. So, for example, or all medical terms or astronomical terms and so on, which is a very useful feature. So when you open one of the items in the vocabulary, you have entries. You have the entry with the normalized form, and then a list of meanings and submeanings, which is the one you can see here at the bottom, but also data about the word's occurrence in Dante's work. So frequency, the index locorum with all the appearances, all the forms, and also the variants in the manuscript traditions. But you also have correspondences with other corpora, as I mentioned, and they are always linked to the relevant resource, some notes relevant to the word's interpretation, and finally, obviously, the credits on who was responsible for preparing this entry. This is a crucial project, also launched very early in 1999 by Mirko Tavoni at the Università di Pisa. Dante's works, all of his works in both Latin and Italian, were manually lemmatized. So there was a huge group of scholars doing the manual annotation for each word, and they were provided with a morphological and syntactical annotation. The dataset includes an open access to the XML files that are annotated with something similar to the TI Lightweight module. But what is interesting and also limitation in Dante search is that users must choose either the morphological query or the syntactical queries. Why? Because they are not superposable. They respond to different structures, so you cannot search for example, a noun in a subordinate. This is the reason why Mirko Tavoni asked us to improve this work that he had been doing for such a long time. So here you can see the morphological query interface. You can search for the form or the lemma, and you can filter for the morphological categories. So for example, only look for nouns or verbs, etc. And you have a list of results, and for each result, if you linger with your mouse on a word, you have the lemma, the category, which is not very readable because it's just initial letters, and its position in the canto. Same goes for the syntactic research. So for example, here I wanted to look for all the subordinates with a expressing a cause, but only the second degree subordinates containing the word perché. And the results here, for example, tells you that this is a causal clause, etc., etc. So we were inspired by this project, Linking Latin, to work and implement the project by Tavoni. Linking Latin is an ERC project directed by Marco Passarotti, whose goal was to build a linked data knowledge base of linguistic resources and natural language processing tools for the study of Latin in general, classical Latin, medieval Latin. It is a huge project. And among the many things that they have done, there is Dante, which is a tree bank containing all Dante's Latin works with a morphological, lexical, and syntactic annotation based on a grammar called the Universal Dependencies Grammar. So it's a little different than the grammar we are taught at school, but it can be automated. And that's the reason why it is now privileged over other syntactic annotations. What is interesting is that it embraces the semantic web paradigm. So Lila is entirely interoperable with other linguistic corpora, and that is also why they chose the universal dependencies. So virtually, you can connect this knowledge on Dante's lemmas, parts of speech, and syntax to any other linguistic resource on the web. At the same time, as I said, it's very difficult to query this material, especially if you don't know very precisely what you have in mind. It's way more difficult to peruse this database. So we are trying to do something different with the project Linking Dante. The idea is not only to implement on Dante Search, but also on making the data gathered by previous projects complying with FAIR standards. FAIR standards are standards. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So every piece of knowledge that you want to model according to FAIR standards must point to a unique identifier, which is stable and does not change in time, so it's always there. And it must be described by very rich semantic metadata, which means that they can be connected with each other and reused by other projects. They obviously need to be linked open data, so they need to be openly accessible to everyone. So we transformed the XML files provided by Dante Source into an RDF graph. We had previously developed an ontology, meaning a formal model of the annotation of Dante Search, describing all the categories and the relationships between the categories that were adopted in Dante Search. And thanks to this, we could automate the transformation of XML into RDF and create a knowledge graph that can be queried. I will not linger on the detail because I see that my time is almost running out. But I'm showing you today something that is not online yet. We will be launching this in occasion of the Dante D in March. The query interface of LIDA will allow users to finally overlap morphological and syntactical queries, as Mirko Tavoni asked us to do. So for example, here you want to look for the word stelle. You can specify that it's a plural, although it's evident from the form. But you only want to see the word stelle in a clause with a goal, a scope sense. And here you can see the results. We try to make it a bit more readable than Dante sources. So you have all the morphological details here, but you can also see other things. So for example, you can see, and that is something we took from Dante sources as well, Dante Search as well, the dialogues. So here you have the two different interlocutors. It's very basic from a graphic point of view because we did it ourselves and we were not great at data visualization. Or you can browse the text and see the different clauses and their relationship with each other. So whether they're coordinates, subordinates, etc., etc. And it will also be the query interface to access references, which is another project I've been working on and I will present in a while, and metaphors from my thesis that Dark mentioned earlier. On the Diamond Dante project, I should not linger. You know it very well. It was born in the 80s. And Hollander described it as the best simple idea I've ever had. I mean, the guy is not wrong. It contains 77 commentaries to Dante's Commedia from as early as 1322 to the commentary prepared by Nick Fosca for the project. And it now features the Dante Lab Reader, which is a way to digitally recreate a desk. So you can combine 3 different parts of your virtual working environment and compare, for example, the original text, a translation, and a commentary, and you can combine them in the way that is most suitable to you. So earlier on, I was discussing sources, and this is another project, Dante Sources, developed by the Università di Pisa. It's a digital library reliant on a formal ontology. As I said before, a formal ontology is a description of a very specific domain of knowledge that aims to be formal, meaning you define very clearly all the classes and all the individuals that might be ascribed to these classes and the properties connecting these classes. So for example, you give axioms on whether the properties are reflexive or not, etc. This means that the metadata are semantically powerful enough to enable automatic reasoning. So the machine can elaborate on the data itself without our prompts. And you can connect knowledge in ways that would not be possible. So Dante Sources was born to provide info on the primary sources in Dante's minor works. It is not something that was originally created within the project, but they sort of digitized all the commentaries in the most recent Mondadori commented editions of Dante's minor works. Every time that they would pinpoint a primary source, they would put it here. So users can perform queries with filters on, for example, give me all the sources of Dante's Convivio Book 1, or give me all the places in Dante's work where the Aeneid is quoted, or where Cicero is quoted, or where the Bible is quoted, or just give me all the explicit citations, etc., etc. You cannot see the text, which is a shortcoming of the project. The outputs are normally charts, tables, and downloadable files. And here again, when I try to put a slide to show you, I couldn't generate the content. There is something wrong, there is a bug. So I couldn't show you what it looks like when you perform a query. We did something similar, but in an extended way with the project that Darek was mentioning before, Hypermedia Dante Network. It's coordinated by Michelangelo Zaccarello. And as I said before, the outputs of this other project will be conflated into the LIDA interface. So through LIDA linking Dante, you will be able to query all the data provided by Dante Search, but also by Hypermedia Dante Network. The scope of Hypermedia Dante Network is broader than Dante Sources because we are working with the Commedia, where the use of sources is more complex and with a wider selection of commentaries. So we took the ontology developed for Dante Sources and we expanded it to provide more content. And thanks to a partnership with the Dante project, we annotated some of the commentaries from the DDP. We could not do them all. So for example, here, if you browse the text, you see that the first verse of Inferno Uno has this small icon telling you that there are 3 commentaries pinpointing primary sources on this verse. And for example, the Anonimo Fiorentino associates this verse with the Psalms, and especially with Psalm 89:10. Here you have the text this time of the source quoted by the Anonimo Fiorentino, and a few more details. So for example, what is the reason of the relationship? Why is Dante quoting this source? Well, in reference to the theory of the ages of man. One last project before conclusions. So this is a project I've been working on. It has been launched in 2023. It's a national print project. It's very tough working within this project because it's very interdisciplinary. We always say that they are because we want to attract fundings. This time it really is. The idea is to provide a formal method for model for literary interpretation on fictional characters. So we took 4 case studies from medieval Italian literature, 4 characters, female characters from 2 from Dante's work and 2 from Boccaccio's. The idea that led us to propose this project is that what you see online is generally metadata, as I said earlier. So data pertaining to the historical and material features of our cultural heritage. So for example, here on the website of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, you can see that the language of Dante de Vulgare Eloquenza is Latin and a few categories, the date of this document, etc., etc. But all of this leaves out the most of what we do, which is interpreting text. So with MITE, we are trying to focus on observational data, meaning the observations provided by scholars, which are particularly difficult to model for various reasons. First of all, because they are heterogeneous with respect to both methodology and critical vocabulary. as you know very well, a critical essay from a gender studies perspective has nothing to do with a philological contribution. They are also reliant on evidence that is not always falsifiable. So they do depend on something which is very discursive and depends a lot on the rhetoric and argumentation strategies of the scholar themselves writing the text. They're expressed in natural language, so you can obviously try and abstract on what they are saying and create a model about it, but you will leave a lot of things out of it. The argumentation is not always explicit nor clear. We were discussing with George about the differences between Italian and English scholarship and about how scholarly contributions in Italian are not always very precisely outlined and explained. And sometimes they might even contain claims that are implicitly in contradiction with each other, which is very challenging to represent from a formal point of view because it defies the laws of logic on which this model should be based on. So if you're interested, I cannot really go into the details, but please get in touch or look at our website. So I've talked a lot, but before leaving you, I wanted to sort of draw some conclusions on what I said. We have such a huge amount of digital projects because virtually all of our work today is born digital. Take, for example, Dante Matrix. Why is it that easy for the group to put online all the variants? Well, because they transcribed them through the digital environment in the first place. So there's nothing easier than making them available online. And we are working collectively in a way that has no precedent. And all these data can be manipulated, published, connected, updated. It's all very exciting. But at the same time, these projects need to be maintained. There is the huge problem of sustainability. As I mentioned, some of those have not been updated, were only announced and never completed, or are entirely incomplete. And their sustainability, so their capacity to last in time, depends on the formal language that they chose to adopt. So for example, XML is a very universally accepted language. So it's not very powerful from a semantic point of view, but it's so widely used that things written in XML can be transformed into something else if we want, because it's a very well written language. But also what is most important is that the institutions that finance and host these projects sometimes do not have the fundings or the skills, like from a very technical point of view, to maintain these projects that we launch online. So in general, what I would want you to take out from this lecture is that we still lack a truly collective and holistic approach. You have seen so many projects. They are so interesting, each and every one of them, but they very rarely talk with each other. And it would be so great to have someone, an infrastructure, gathering all the institutions and the people involved in this work that we are doing together to produce, for example, guidelines on how to annotate text and what are the infos we want to highlight and what are the good practices for treating, manipulating these texts and publishing them online, and just an overarching infrastructures. There are European attempts at that, for example, the platform Europeana, but they are so huge that you can very easily get lost in them. Finally, one last question, and it's a big one. How much is AI going to change all of this? It's an already very complex and multifaceted landscape, but especially with respect to teaching, we need to ask ourselves a lot of questions. Pertaining, for example, gamification, the fact that we need to make our teaching more and more enticing to students. And sometimes, especially if they are a bit naive in their use of AI, they might lack the critical evaluation. So, for example, they might not be able to evaluate the reliability, authenticity, biases. And what worries me the most is that they could not be able to distinguish between what is a document and what is the interpretation associated to that document, nor to produce original interpretation. Because if everything is so mixed up all the time, well, they might lose the will, the patience to read the text fully and just look for the easy paraphrase, summary, and interpretation. A very interesting talk that I listened to a few days ago in Macerata put forward the concept of epistemic modesty. So the idea that we should be very humble in the way we approach our knowledge. So recognizing, as Socrates would have it, we know how much we do not know. And with AI, it's going to be very difficult to distinguish what we know from what we do not know. And so, yes, I know that I'm leaving you with more questions than answers, but I hope that this has been a sort of frantic but interesting trip in digital projects. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So this slide. We'll come back over here. So I'm sure there are going to be plenty of questions.
Of water.
Okay. Right, stop sharing. What have we done wrong here? Okay. Now, I'm first of all, I want to thank Guy. That was a brilliant journey into what is a fascinating thing. The one thing you were kind of touching on at the end there, looking at sources and everything. But one thing that a lot of these digital projects, right from the word go, have is there is this real desire. You can see it in their makeup that they want to bring you to the text.
Yes.
And that's something I've always admired about them. Even going back to the older ones, there's this need to kind of bring you to the text. And some people might say there's a bit of an obsession within Dante studies with the text, but without all of the whole paraphernalia of the kind of paratextual practices around it. But it's kind of almost imbricated in the digital already. This love and this need about the text. Now we have. I know Federica is on a train, so I know she's written something in the chat there. Where is it gone? I can't see it anymore. I have a question about how much these digital projects and will be changing our teaching practice. What is your experience?
Well, my experience is easy to summarize because I don't teach Dante. So I research on Dante, but I don't teach it. So I teach him. So no, I think that they might be very useful. And there are a few more that are very captivating, and I couldn't possibly introduce them all, but they might be great to just ease students into such a complex word as is the one as is Dante's. At the same time, as I was trying to say very briefly and goofily at the end, we need to be aware of how much students can now find online. And I mean, they're great projects, but I wouldn't want my students to gather all the information that they get on Dante's text online. I would want them to still read books, but maybe I'm old-fashioned.
But you did pose the question at the beginning that there is a tendency also with a lot of these things, as the technology is improving, that we're kind of moving from the quantitative to the qualitative.
Yes.
And your Mite project seems to be touching into these areas a lot.
Yes.
Can you say, because you selected female characters.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Sure. We selected female characters because we wanted to go over the longue durée in critical scholarship, and we figured that female characters are the ones that are subject to a bigger shift in our interpretive strategies. So, for example, one of our characters is Francesca, and we chose the very famous ones because we wanted to have a very broad corpus of criticism devoted to them, as to be able to compare many different texts and approaches and vocabularies and so on. So if you take 19th century criticism on Francesca, as it has been shown in a magnific work by Lorenzo Renzi, there was a huge debate during the Romanticism on whether Francesca was innocent or guilty. So all the interpretation on her character focused on ethics. And then you look at recent scholarship, and thanks to Linda Barolini, Elena Lombardi, and to, in general, the the gender studies perspective, the way we read Francesca now has entirely changed. So what we would want to do is to propose a model that allows us to take into account all these differences in a formal way.
Biases.
Yeah.
Show up the biases.
Yeah.
Selena Vandy has a question. Selena, would you want to turn on your camera and your mic? Hi, Selena.
I think that Julia Bolton Holloway was before me.
No, it's Serena first.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Gaia. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for your excellent lecture. It was so useful and fascinating. And congratulations on these beautiful projects you're working on. I wanted to ask a question regarding your last question on AI. Since a couple of days ago, we discussed AI in depth at the Giornata dei Italianisti here in Dublin. I was curious about whether AI is being used in research digital projects already, and how is it changing the role of you scholars? And I'm ignorant, I admit, in digital humanities more than you, of course, but how is being used, if it is being used by researchers?
I'm not aware on any specific project using AI so far. And as I said, I think that, for example, in natural language processing, there have been very interesting developments in quite a few years now, maybe even decades, that have not been adopted to Dante studies yet. For example, Lorenzo Dell'Oso is editing a special issue of Italian studies about AI and Italian studies. And I proposed an article which gives me the creeps every time that I think that I have to write it. So the idea is that for my PhD thesis, I manually identified all metaphors in Dante's comedy. And through natural language processing, I will try and train an algorithm to do so alone. So I will experiment the algorithm on the rime and see if it works, how much, how little. And so as far as I know of, there are not many projects so far. I think that we all sort of included AI in our teaching, whether we want it or not. But structured projects around AI, I don't know about any.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Julia, you had a question.
Yes. I came to Italy from teaching Dante in America to ordinary undergraduate students and so forth. And I was shocked in the libraries that often the intellectuals confessed to me they hated Dante. And I realized this was because he was not taught well. Whereas I had been living in the countryside amongst the part which was Christianized by the Irish pilgrims who came to the area around Fiesole, Santa Brigida, Sant'Andrea, San Donato, and was reading this huge manuscript which San Donato had written, where Bridget hangs her cloak on the sunbeam to dry. And I was realizing that the contadini amongst this area were reciting Dante Cantastorie. So I put together a website with the text of the Commedia, the manuscript illuminations, the backdrop being the Botticelli drawings, the music, because I was able to have it performed by musicologists working with the manuscripts of Dante's epoch, and finding that actually, if we go back to looking at how Dante's manuscripts were created, they were beautiful, they were full of color, they were sensual, they evoked the music and so on. And I was realizing that one could do all of that digitally. So I did it on the web at a website called Dante Vivo after Giovanni Papini. And we've also been reading, housewives, reading all of the Commedia 3 times and the Vita Nova and so on, and finding that ordinary people, as Dante intended, can love Dante. He gets a little bit too intellectualized, I think, in the academic world. And so there's a loss of the... Mary Carruthers speaks about the medieval manuscripts being a memory system with the alternating reds and blues and so forth. So I've learned how to do that digitally, Because I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think we can learn from Dante's own period. And I've given 18 boxes of my research on Brunetto Latino. That is also on the web, where I've given the manuscripts and the transcripts side by side, just using, in that case, doc files. My website is just with HTML, JPEG, and MP3s, because I feel if you use simple methods that are accessible even on cell phones, that it makes it accessible to everyone. I don't know if I'm making sense. It seems as though I'm in the completely opposite direction to all of these extremely clever, but rather distancing projects.
Of course, thank you. And I know your project, obviously, I would have liked to have the time to discuss your project as well. But yeah, as I said, obviously, the digital environment gives us the opportunity to have multisensorial experiences, conveying audio and visual and many different features. And they can provide a very immersive experience that, yes, can absolutely lead us back to embodied experiences of what copies and readers of Dante might have felt like in approaching the work. Thank you.
Okay, Beth, I believe you have a question as well. You have your hand up.
Yes, hi, thank you. Grazie, Gaia. Thank you so much for the presentation. This was really wonderful. And thank you also for the shout outs to Dante today, which of course we appreciate. I wanted to come back to one of your last points, which was about increased collaboration between researchers that are working in on digital humanities projects or in the field of digital humanities. I couldn't agree more with your suggestion that we think about increased infrastructure or just like better practices of communication between those of us that are working in the field. I wonder if you have any suggestions for how to build that infrastructure, especially when it comes to work that's being done, say, in the US and in Europe. That's, I think in Europe, there are a lot of, like, people are going to the same conferences or are meeting one another in these kinds of environments. And those of us that are working in the US tend to be like less involved in those kinds of conversations. It's also, of course, true in Italy, right? Like in Italy, there are groups of researchers that are much more like able to collaborate with one another. So I guess I just wanted to hear more of your thoughts on how we can start building that infrastructure or further building that infrastructure.
Well, from a technical point of view, we have everything we need because we do have the formal languages, and we could just work together on ontologies that are shared and that can serve to all purposes. What we are lacking is a political and social will to truly collaborate. So I wouldn't possibly dare to address such a challenging question, but obviously I think that the best idea would be to involve major institutions. So for example, the Bibliografia Dantesca is a virtuous example, in my opinion, because it conveys through the relevant institutions work done in either the US and Italy and Europe more broadly. So every time that you appeal to institutions to sort of supervise the work we do from the infrastructure point of view, you have more chances. But we still have a huge rivalry between us, between different research methodologies, schools, research groups. And so sometimes you get the impression that someone just wants to plant the flag on a topic and say, oh, I'm working on this, so nobody else should. And that is human, and I wouldn't possibly know how to deal with this. But thank you for your question. Yeah, that's the big question, to be honest.
Thanks, Beth. We have I don't know if it yet is it a comment or because I can barely make it out from Cormac up in Dublin. I've just lost it there again. It's very hard with my mouse. Digital resources are hugely productive for Dante, as he is such a coherent, encyclopedic, interconnected writer with an endless of reference, limited memory, and a creative approach to every possible source and analog. Thank you. He is in fact a digital native and illiterate. Okay, it wouldn't work so well for less systematic or more random writer. So, is there a danger that We are already seeing that the best that digital research can do and everything else will be sad, disappointed, and a waste of sponsors' money. Thanks, Cormac.
I wouldn't be so pessimistic, but I do agree, and that is something I would have liked to discuss as well. I presented a few of the most important digital projects, not even all of them. And if I asked you how many projects on Petrarca and Boccaccio you knew in the digital environment, you would possibly come up with 2 or 3, maybe.
Yeah.
So I absolutely agree with the fact that the work by Dante really prompts us to do such a.
There you are, Cormac.
Hello.
That's me answered. Yeah.
I don't know whether we are already at our best. I think that technologies are evolving very quickly. And for example, I am a bit biased in this, and it's something I'm ready to acknowledge. I've been working with semantic web projects for quite a while now, and I do truly believe in the fact that they might be useful in connecting knowledge and making it more sound, more coherent from a logical point of view. But at the same time, there are a lot of critics who dislike the semantic web approach because they say that it's too time consuming and that we don't gain enough. So that is an open question. And so we have emergent technologies. We get all very excited about them, and then they might just set very quickly down. And I don't know, that's too big a question for me, but I wouldn't be so pessimistic as to think that we have already done our best and nothing else can be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I mean, wasting sponsors' money. They always pay us so little that I'm not worried about wasting money.
But I did notice that a lot of projects have a very cool acronym. And people spend a lot of time working on the acronym.
Yes.
Kind of, how am I going to get Dante into this or whatever? And so anyone out there budding, having a nice digital project, work on your acronyms first. They're very, very important for gaining this much needed and well-deserved lucre from whatever sponsor is giving it. Are there questions in the room? Because
I think
Kenneth has a question.
Oh, Kenneth has a question. If you're there, Kenneth. Is it a question?
No, sorry. The recent hack in the BL has, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
It's
Sorry,
not
it's
easy
very,
to navigate.
Sorry, this where we are here.
Yes. So it is true. Digital data can actually be very fragile, and I do agree with Kenneth. For example, the breach into security of the British Library has. I mean, would you have been able to predict that for months, years maybe, we wouldn't be able to access the catalog of the most important British institution with respect to. So I don't know. Sorry. Yes.
Well, the catalog is one problem, but it's the huge database of digitized manuscripts that is the other, which is only very slowly coming back, and maybe years before, in fact, that digital catalog is back. And so it's a remarkable kind of destructiveness. I mean, we've had students doing PhD projects on manuscripts that had to be abandoned because they couldn't access the material. So this level of destructiveness is huge, and so the risk, when I suppose I'm kind of thinking about all the eggs being in one basket, everything being digitized very, very quickly presents a kind of risk that we're not perhaps always taking account of. And I was thinking and laughing to myself when you were talking about the Vocabolario Dantesco being printed. In the event of a hack, the printed book of the Vocabolario is all we've got. Like it's literally going to be the only thing that survives after a flare, a solar flare, and all the data's gone, or after the tech bros decide to destroy everything because they've become too powerful. The book might be the only thing we have left.
Yes, but the book libraries might burn, so books are not that immune to either. No, but I do agree, and I had a slide on the tech pros at the beginning. Then there was really too much content, and I couldn't discuss about this. But obviously, pertaining to the tech pros, well, the answer is storing all this data and knowledge on servers hosted by public institutions. They're not free of risk. I mean, if there is a coup d'etat, not even the server of Sapienza or any other institution is entirely safe. But for example, a protocol such as IIIF, it's a distributed protocol. So that is a way to ensure that your data is a bit more safe. And it's also something that pertains to the question I was raising of inequality in digital literacy and access to resources. But these languages, such as the semantic web languages, they are meant to be interoperable, and so the data do not matter that much. The focus is not on the data, but on the structure that governs the organization of the data, which is a little less worrying, perhaps. But I do agree, it is worrying.
Thanks, Kenneth, for that grim prospect, and on that grim note, we're going to. Well, now before we thank Gaia one more time, I just want to remind you that next week our penultimate lecture is. Is it a lecture? Is it a performance? I'm not really sure what it is, but we are really excited to have Kimberly Campanello coming over to us, because Kimberly is working on her own version of Dante's Commedia, and Kimberly is a professor of creative writing at the University of Leeds. And she's very familiar with Ireland. She's worked a lot with Anne-Marie Hearn and other Irish poets about the legacy of the Magdalen laundries in particular. A recent issue of Poetry Ireland was dedicated to this. But it really is a fantastic poet, contemporary poet, and we are very, very excited to have her. So we're kind of doing a bit of everything this year. And the title of Kimberly's talk next week at the same time is Descending into Detail, Meanwhile in Dante's Commedia with the poet Kay. And we'll be back over in the council room for those of us who embodied people who actually come to these lectures. Although it is lovely to see that finally our online audience has started asking questions properly. Please don't write them down. Please show your face, because we like to see you and know that you're there. But it only remains for me to thank Gaia. I mean, I think we'll all agree, online and here in the room, that was really a wonderful, wonderful talk, and kind of simplified it for people like me who are quite illiterate when it comes to these kind of things. But just to show the vast wealth of projects out there, and really valid ones, and show the kind of directions in which not only Dante studies are going, but also the fact how people access text. And I really like the way you kind of put an emphasis on the kind of the ethical side to all of this, the fair text, but also who has access to this digital world. I think these are really, really important. Yes, AI is the big question everybody wants to talk about, but there are all kinds of ethical issues related to these things as well. And I'm glad you touched on those, guys. So please join me in adding, because I have to take this lady for a drink. But let's thank her for quite a wonderful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Gaia, and thank you all for listening.
I will see you all next week. I am now going to, I think, hopefully stop this recording. Lovely to see you all, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.